when an actor is sick or has had an accident, other actors right away, they volunteer to go on and replace them.
For most of his life, Red Skelton didn't need anything fancy to make people laugh. A simple look, a tiny pause, or one of his famous characters could fill a whole room with joy. But near the end of his TV career, Red created a special that didn't get the spotlight he hoped for. Not because he wasn't loved, but because the TV world had already changed around him. Fans never stopped asking, why didn't this air? And today, we look back at what really happened to that final TV special, why it stayed unseen for so long, and why it still matters. Join us as we dive into the story behind Red Skelton's lost finale and the moment it finally returned, the early life that shaped a performer. Skelton's story begins long before fame, in a small Indiana town where life was anything but easy. Born Richard Bernard Ehart on July 18, 1913 in Vincennes, he entered the world already facing loss. His father, Joseph Skelton, had passed away just 2 months before his birth. Joseph had once been a clown with the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, but by the time Richard arrived, the family store was gone, and money was extremely tight. Richard grew up the youngest of 4 boys, Denny, Christopher, Paul, and little Richard, who carried the name Ehart from his father's stepfather. People around town often said the family was extremely poor, and one neighbor even stopped her daughter from dating him because she thought he had no future. But Richard learned early that sometimes the people with the least are the ones who learn to fight the hardest for joy. To help his mother, Ida May, who worked several jobs after losing her husband, Richard went to work at just 7 years old. He sold newspapers on the streets and used a loud, playful patter until people bought, just to make him quiet down. Even then, he could make strangers laugh without meaning to. But everything changed around 1923 when a traveling comedian, said to be Ed Wynn, stopped to talk to the little newsboy outside a theater. Richard suggested he see a local show. The man gave him money by buying every paper he had and even took him backstage. That moment lit a spark Richard never forgot. This was when he realized that making people smile could be more than a childhood trick. It could be his whole life. And soon, he would try every kind of stage he could find, even the ones that broke down beneath his feet. Showboats, mistakes, and the first real laughs. Richard dropped out of school around age 13 or 14, not because he didn't care, but because performing had already claimed him. He tried minstrel shows in Vincennes and then found work on a showboat called the Cotton Blossom, drifting along the Ohio and Missouri rivers. He loved the riverboat life, but as that era faded away, he moved on to new stages. He tried serious acting too, joining the John Lawrence Stock Theater Company for dramatic roles. But every time he tried to stay serious, the audience laughed. During Uncle Tom's Cabin, he stood on a treadmill meant to show movement, but when it malfunctioned and began reversing, Richard panicked and shouted, "Help! I'm backing into heaven!" The crowd roared. The manager did not. Richard was fired before the week was over, but each mistake pushed him closer to who he really was. A comedian who didn't need perfect lines or fancy sets. His gifts came from the unexpected moments. By age 15, he worked in burlesque. And even though the jokes there grew too wild for his taste, he understood one thing clearly. Laughter could open doors. At 16, he spent a short stretch with the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, the same one his father once worked for. It felt like he had stepped into a part of his own history. Yet the circus was only another stop on his long road. The country was entering the Great Depression. Money was scarce everywhere, and Ida knew she could no longer hold her youngest from the life calling him. She let him leave home with her blessing, saying it seemed like his destiny had caught up with him at an early age. What none of them knew then was that destiny was about to drop him, literally, into his first real job in comedy. The early road that shaped Red Skelton. Around 1929, still just a teenager, Richard joined Doc R.E. Lewis's traveling medicine show. He started as an errand boy, earning $10 a week and sending all of it home. His big break came by accident. One day he slipped, fell off the stage, and smashed several bottles as he hit the ground. The crowd roared with laughter, and Lewis immediately saw that Richard had something rare. The fall became part of the act, and Richard soon added jokes and songs to keep the crowds entertained. When his mother worried he wasn't saving anything, he simply said, "We get plenty to eat, and we sleep in the wagon." He stayed with the show for 4 years, learning how to read a crowd and how to make people laugh with simple honesty. But medicine shows were fading, and Richard knew he had to move on. That next step led him toward burlesque again, and then toward the moment that changed everything. During a dance marathon where he worked as the master of ceremonies, a young usher named Edna Stillwell won the contest. She walked up to him and told him she didn't like his jokes. Instead of being angry, Richard asked, "Can you do better?" Edna believed she could. They married in 1931, and she became his writer, manager, and teacher. When his salary was about to be cut, she marched into the office and came out with a raise and extra benefits. Since Richard had left school early, Edna bought textbooks and helped him study until he earned his high school equivalency degree. They toured small theaters, survived by selling cubes of fog remover, and kept moving from town to town until their act reached Montreal. Each step pushed Richard closer to becoming Red Skelton, though his rise to true fame was only just beginning. The routine that changed everything. Skelton's performances in Canada opened doors he had been hoping for since his earliest days on the stage. While working in Montreal, he and Edna met Harry Anger, a vaudeville producer for New York City's Loew's State Theater. Anger believed in their talent and promised them a headlining spot. But there was a catch. They needed new and stronger material to match the expectations of New York crowds. One morning, as the couple sat in a Montreal diner, Edna began watching how people ate their donuts. Some dipped carefully, some made a mess, and some hardly paid attention at all. She nudged Skelton and told him she had found their next routine. Together, they created the Donut Dunkers Act, built on Skelton's funny visual impressions of the different ways people ate donuts. That simple idea became the routine that finally gave them their Loew's State engagement and a generous fee. The couple saw 1937 as Skelton's big break. To prepare, they hired New York comedy writers for new material because they believed they needed jokes that felt more sophisticated. But when Skelton stepped onto the Loew's stage and began performing the new scripts, something felt off. The audience stayed silent. They did not even applaud. Only when Skelton dropped the fancy material and went back to the Donut Dunkers and his older routines did the crowd come alive. Laughter filled the theater, showing him that what worked best was what came naturally. And soon, one major figure in American politics would help push that routine even further into the spotlight. Winning over the president. The Donut Dunkers Act did more than save the Loew's engagement. It helped Skelton rise from a working comedian to a recognizable celebrity. While performing at the Capitol Theater in Washington, D.C. in 1937, Skelton caught the attention of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt enjoyed his humor so much that he invited Skelton to perform at a White House luncheon. During one of the official toasts, Skelton picked up the president's glass and joked, "Careful what you drink, Mr. President. I got rolled in a place like this once." The room erupted in laughter, and the moment stayed with Roosevelt. That one line was enough for Skelton to become the master of ceremonies for the president's official birthday celebrations for many years afterward. His confidence grew, and with it came a new interest from Hollywood. But the second time Hollywood came calling, it would not end like his first attempt. In 1932, Skelton had taken a screen test that went nowhere. Nothing came from it. His career continued on stage, and he waited for another chance. That chance arrived in 1938 when he was cast in a supporting role for RKO Pictures in Having Wonderful Time. It was not a starring part, but it was his first step into film. Not long after, he appeared in 2 short films for Vitaphone in 1939 titled Seeing Red and the Broadway Buckaroo. These early film moments helped him get used to the camera, but it was a young MGM actor who encouraged him to take the leap that would define his movie career, finding his place in Hollywood. Mickey Rooney watched Skelton perform the Donut Dunkers act at President Roosevelt's 1940 birthday party. Impressed, he told Skelton he should try for more film work. When Skelton went in for an MGM screen test, he performed his popular routines like Guzzler's Gin, but he also added quick pantomimes as the camera rolled. One of these pieces was called Imitation of Movie Heroes Dying, where he acted out the dramatic death scenes of stars like George Raft, Edward G. Robinson, and James Cagney. This mix of comedy and physical performance worked. MGM hired him, and Skelton soon appeared in several films for the studio throughout the 1940s. His first major appearance came in 1940 as comic relief in the war drama Flight Command. He acted alongside Robert Taylor, Ruth Hussey, and Walter Pidgeon. A year later, he played supporting comic roles in two Dr. Kildare medical dramas, Dr. Kildare's Wedding Day and The People vs. Dr. Kildare. But things changed even more when Skelton began starring in comedy features as an inept radio detective known as the Fox. His first film in the role was Whistling in the Dark in 1941, where he worked closely with director S. Sylvan Simon. Simon quickly became his favorite director, and the two worked together on other films including Whistling in Dixie in 1942 and Whistling in Brooklyn in 1943. Through these projects, Skelton was becoming more than a comic sidekick. He was becoming the lead, and Hollywood was ready to place him in roles that mixed comedy with music, bringing him next to some of the biggest stars of the time. A new level of stardom. In 1941, Skelton stepped into the world of musical comedies, performing alongside Eleanor Powell, Ann Sothern, and Robert Young in Lady Be Good. 1 year later, he again starred with Powell in Ship Ahoy, and with Sothern in Panama Hattie. His presence on screen grew stronger, and in 1943, he played a memorable role as a nightclub hat-check attendant who dreams he is King Louis XV in Dewberry Was a Lady. He acted with Lucille Ball and Gene Kelly, creating one of the most memorable scenes in the film. That same year, he starred in I Dood It, a romantic musical comedy directed by Vincente Minnelli. The film was mostly a remake of Buster Keaton's Spite Marriage. Keaton, who had become a comedy consultant for MGM after his own film career slowed down, worked closely with Skelton on set. Keaton believed deeply in Skelton's talent. He even went to MGM studio head Louis B. Mayer and asked to start a small production company inside the studio for himself and Skelton to create films together. Keaton told Mayer he was willing to give up his salary if the films were not successful, but Mayer declined. Still, Keaton continued coaching Skelton behind the scenes. His film The General from 1926 later became the basis for Skelton's picture, A Southern Yankee, in 1948. Skelton continued his steady climb in Hollywood, starring opposite Esther Williams in Bathing Beauty in 1944 as a songwriter with romantic troubles. Soon after, he played a minor but memorable role in the Ziegfeld Follies. In a segment called When Television Comes, he performed as a TV announcer demonstrating a brand of gin. As he drank, he moved from mild inebriation to complete drunkenness. This was actually the Guzzler's Gin routine, written by Edna, the same routine he had been performing since 1940. He kept building on this success and starred in The Show-Off in 1946, playing the boastful clerk J. Aubrey Piper opposite Marilyn Maxwell and Marjorie Main. That role continued to prove what audiences were learning year by year. Skelton could make almost any character feel alive, funny, and unforgettable. A career shifting toward freedom and change. As Skelton's career grew, so did his desire for more creative freedom. His MGM contract required the studio's approval for every radio show and appearance he made, and this limited him. When he renegotiated his long-term contract, he asked for something new. He wanted permission to stay active in radio and to explore television, which was still young at the time. Much of the work in television came from New York, and Skelton already knew from performing there that his physical comedy would fit the medium well. By 1947, Films were no longer his main priority. Radio and television offered fewer limits, more control, and better pay. But MGM's rules were strict. He needed written consent for each weekly radio show and even for charity events. He tried to buy out the rest of his contract, but the $750,000 cost was too high. During the filming of The Fuller Brush Man, he grew frustrated and said, "Movies are not my field. Radio and television are." He asked for a release and for a clause allowing him to work in television, but MGM denied both requests. Columnist Sheila Graham wrote in 1948 that Skelton wished to make only one film a year and spend the rest of his time touring with his radio show. His style also created mixed reactions. His habit of ad-libbing meant the final filmed version often looked very different from the script. Some directors loved his creativity. Others struggled with it. His friend S. Sylvan Simon allowed him full freedom, but MGM felt Simon encouraged too much slapstick when they wanted Skelton in more romantic roles. When Simon was not asked to direct retakes for A Southern Yankee, he left the studio and asked that his name be removed from the film's credits. Skelton continued pushing for television rights, and in 1950, MGM finally agreed. They extended his contract and allowed him to work in television, making him the only major MGM star with that privilege. Once the door opened, he began working across film, radio, and television at the same time. It was exhausting. He later admitted in 1956 that he would never again work in all three media at once. Still, he continued appearing in films such as The Yellow Cab Man, Excuse My Dust, Texas Carnival, Lovely to Look At, The Clown, and The Great Diamond Robbery. His last major MGM film was Public Pigeon No. 1 in 1957. After that, his roles became occasional, but he still had important highlights. In Thousands Cheer in 1943, he took part in a comic eating scene with Margaret O'Brien. In Bathing Beauty in 1944, Esther Williams said, "I was lucky to have Red in my first big movie because he was such a box office draw." The film also featured a famous routine designed by Buster Keaton, showing Skelton at the height of his comedic power. Meanwhile, his radio show, Red Skelton's Scrapbook of Satire, became the third most popular show in the country, proving his influence across different entertainment worlds. Becoming a television icon and a lasting American clown, Skelton shifted between many film roles in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Trying both comedy and drama. In Ziegfeld Follies in 1946, he performed the classic Guzzler's Gin routine, renamed When Television Comes, shot in a single day by George Sidney. But when he acted in more serious roles, audiences did not respond strongly. His work in The Show-Off in 1946 and Merton of the Movies in 1947 drew mild reactions, so he returned to slapstick and starred in The Fuller Brush Man in 1948. MGM continued searching for scripts that fit him, and Buster Keaton stayed involved. Keaton even asked MGM head Louis B. Mayer to let him and Skelton form a small independent unit using Keaton's stories and gags, offering to give up his salary until the films succeeded. Mayer refused. Skelton's next film, A Southern Yankee in 1948, became an unofficial remake of Keaton's The General, and even included one of Keaton's gags, where Skelton wore a uniform that was blue on one side and gray on the other, so both armies would stop shooting. He appeared in Neptune's Daughter in 1949, helping introduce Baby It's Cold Outside, then starred in The Yellow Cab Man in 1950, which used gags from earlier Keaton films. In Three Little Words in 1950, he played songwriter Harry Ruby opposite Fred Astaire. MGM invested less in Skelton-led films over time, but he kept working. His later MGM films included Watch the Birdie, Excuse My Dust, and Lovely to Look At in 1951, where he delivered the memorable line, "My dentist said I had wonderful teeth, great choppers, but my gums have to come out." His final MGM film was The Clown in 1953, a remake of The Champ. That same year, CBS launched The Red Skelton Show, and it became one of the most successful programs on television for nearly 20 years. Skelton created beloved characters such as Clem Kadiddlehopper, Cauliflower McPug, Sheriff Deadeye, Freddy the Freeloader, and the Mean Whittle Kid, who used the catchphrase, "I doed it." Even after Skelton divorced Edna in 1943, she remained his business manager. He later married Georgia Maureen Davis in 1945, and they had 2 children. Their son Richard died of leukemia just before his 10th birthday in 1958, and Skelton worked non-stop as a way to cope with the loss. Skelton and Georgia divorced in 1972, and he married Lothian Toland in 1973. Though he slowed down in film, he continued performing in nightclubs and on TV, and he built a second career painting clowns. He once said, "I don't want to be called the greatest. I just want to be known as a clown, because to me, that's the height of my profession. It means you can do everything: sing, dance, and, above all, make people laugh." Even at age 80, he performed a farewell show at Carnegie Hall, billed as one of America's clowns, reminding audiences why he became a legend. A career nearing its final act. By the 1970s, Red Skelton was already one of the most familiar faces in American entertainment, but his career was entering a difficult period. Television networks were changing fast, and many long-running shows were being cut. Executives believed these programs attracted older viewers and cost too much to produce. Even though Skelton's show stayed among the top 10 for 17 of its 20 years, CBS decided his program was part of this old lineup and canceled it. The news reached him while he was performing in Las Vegas. He said, "My heart has been broken." Skelton moved to NBC in 1970 with a shorter half-hour version of his show, but it lasted only 1 season. After the cancellation, he returned to live performances, and he found strong support from younger audiences at colleges. Even so, Skelton held bitterness toward CBS for years. He believed the cancellation had little to do with ratings or salary, and more to do with the political climate. During the Vietnam War years, networks faced pressure from anti-war and anti-establishment groups. Skelton was openly conservative and had invited politicians like Vice President Spiro Agnew and Senate Republican Everett Dirksen to appear on his show. He felt CBS grew uncomfortable with this and used demographics as an excuse to cut him. At the same time, his personal life was also shifting. He divorced his wife, Georgia, in 1971 and married Lothian Toland in 1973. Although he avoided television after CBS canceled his show, his bitterness faded enough for him to appear on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson in July 1975. Carson had once been one of Skelton's writers and had stepped in for him in 1954 after Skelton was injured during rehearsal. Skelton also appeared on The Merv Griffin Show later that year. These appearances gave him hope that he might slowly return to television. But life had another painful turn ahead, and it would stop all his plans in an instant. Loss, retreat, and a slowly softening heart. On May 10, 1976, Skelton's former wife, Georgia, took her own life on the 18th anniversary of their son Richard's death. She was 54 and had been in poor health. The news struck Skelton deeply. He stepped away from all work for months as he mourned. Despite the tremendous sadness, he agreed to participate in CBS's 50th anniversary specials in 1978, showing that time had softened at least part of his anger. He also began planning a major comeback in 1977. The plan involved selling the rights to his old television shows and using them in a package deal that would allow him to return to TV with new episodes. The idea called for him to make one brand new show for every 3 old episodes that aired. But the plan fell apart and never moved forward. Soon after, another challenge appeared. In 1980, 13 of his former writers took him to court after hearing that his will asked for all recordings of his old television shows to be destroyed after his death. Skelton told the court his words had been taken out of context. He said, Would you burn the only monument you've built in over 20 years? As the owner of the shows, he had long refused to allow reruns during his lifetime, and his anger toward the TV industry only made him hold even tighter control. But in 1983, Group W reached an agreement with him to rebroadcast some of his shows from 1966 through 1970. Earlier episodes would be made available only after his death. This decision allowed a new generation to see his work once again. Yet even as these agreements were forming, Skelton was walking into the later stage of his career, a period filled with special projects, surprise performances, and one final chance at a major film role, new opportunities, and a final return to television. In 1974, Skelton's interest in film returned for the first time in years. Word spread that Neil Simon's comedy, The Sunshine Boys, would be made into a movie. Skelton had not had a major film role since Public Pigeon No. 1 in 1957. He screen tested for the role of Willie Clark alongside Jack Benny, who had been cast as Al Lewis. Neil Simon had originally planned for Jack Albertson, who played Willie on Broadway, to take the same part in the film. But Skelton's screen test impressed him so much that he changed his mind. Skelton turned down the offer, though, after deciding that the financial deal was not good enough. Jack Benny later had to withdraw due to illness, and the roles eventually went to George Burns and Walter Matthau. Even though Skelton did not appear in the film, the strong screen test proved he could still command attention. In the 1980s, Skelton also made several specials for HBO. One of the most remembered was Freddy the Freeloader's Christmas Dinner in 1981, followed by the Funny Faces series. In 1984, he performed in a Royal Command performance for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, a show that later aired in the United States. Years later, a portion of one of his final interviews, recorded by Stephen F. Zambo, appeared in the 2005 PBS special, The Pioneers of Primetime. These appearances showed the public that even though network television had pushed him aside, he was still able to shine when given the chance. But time was moving quickly, and Skelton was living through the final chapter of a life spent in front of audiences. Final years and a legacy that never faded. Through the 1980s and into the early 1990s, Skelton continued to perform and create in smaller ways. Fans who followed him saw a man who refused to slow down. In 1990, at age 80, he performed a farewell show at Carnegie Hall under the billing One of America's Clowns. It was a title he loved. He once said, "I don't want to be called the greatest. I just want to be known as a clown, because to me that's the height of my profession. It means you can do everything: sing, dance, and, above all, make people laugh." He also continued painting clowns, a talent that became a successful late-career passion. In 1994, he made one of his last public appearances. Then, on September 17, 1997, Skelton died at the age of 84 from pneumonia at the Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage, California. He was laid to rest in the Skelton family tomb in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. He rests alongside his son, Richard, and his former wife, Georgia. Even in death, the family that shaped his comedy and his heartbreak stayed close to him. Skelton's later years were filled with losses, returns, attempts, and reflections, but through all of it, he remained what he had always wanted to be, a clown who made millions of people smile. What part of Red Skelton's journey surprised you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.